Welcome back to the Sober Sofa. My name is Shanti Patty Owen, and I am your host for this channel, where we discuss all things addiction and sobriety. I was a former model back in the 80s, and since 2016, I have worked as a sober companion and a sober coach. There are people in your lives that love you, and most of you out there are not even trying to commit suicide. It's an accidental overdose, and we're calling it fentanyl poisoning. I am a sex addict, love addict, an alcoholic, a compulsive gambler, and a debtor. Today's topic is a lot more serious than some of mine have been of recent. Today's topic is fentanyl poisoning, and I'm going to give you 5 life-saving tips to keep you and your loved ones safe. For those of you who don't know much about fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. It is the most deadly drug out there today. One pill that is laced with fentanyl can kill. Now, normally we think of overdoses as someone who has substance use disorder. We expect at some point they're going to overdose. Maybe they're heroin addicts, maybe they're addicted to oxy. But what's happening in epidemic proportions right now is fentanyl poisoning. So these people who are maybe ordering it online, they want to order oxy or they want to order Percocet or Adderall. A lot of these are young adults and they're ordering it on Snapchat. They think they're ordering a prescription drug when indeed it is a fake and it is laced with fentanyl, and sometimes it is pure fentanyl. We are now experiencing the highest epidemic in U.S. history of overdoses, and 2/3 of those overdoses are related to fentanyl. Last year alone in the U.S., we experienced over 100,000 overdoses. So the reason I'm talking about this is because, yes, 2 people in my life, they have lost their young adults due to fentanyl poisoning. The other reason I'm talking about it is because of the prevalence of this. So we're talking about high school students, college students who are experimenting for the first time with drugs. They have no intention of killing themselves, and yet, after one dose, they have passed away, and the families have been destroyed. So, though this is normally, my channel is more about abstinence from drugs and alcohol. This is slightly controversial, but it's life-saving. I'm talking about a harm reduction model, not an abstinence model, because clearly the abstinence model is not working for many of these young adults, and they're dying left and right. So there are 5 very important life-saving tips that can save your life or your loved one's life. The number 1 life-saving tip is we must remove the stigma. I know in a world where no drugs existed might be better for most people, but it is not reality, and young people will experiment, so we need to keep them safe. So we need to remove the stigma. And a big part of removing that stigma is using a harm reduction model. So this is going to assume that people will use drugs. And how do we help them use drugs safely? The number 2 life-saving tip are fentanyl test strips. Thank God somebody created these. We can actually test the drug before we ingest it to see if they have any kind of trace of fentanyl. And if there is, immediately throw them out. The test strips, if you look online, there are several organizations, the angels that they are providing these test strips free of cost. So there is no excuse. If you choose to use a drug, test it first. If you haven't learned anything from losing your friends and family members, go online. Check out all the horrific stories of how many people are dying left and right from this fentanyl poisoning, and test your drugs. Get yourself naloxone spray. Naloxone is the generic version of Narcan. Maybe you're more familiar with Narcan. So it is a nasal spray that you can put into an individual who appears to have overdosed. And it's also safe if you don't know if they've had an opioid. It doesn't matter. You can still use the nasal spray if you even think they might have had an overdose due to an opioid ingestion. Now, here's the thing specifically with fentanyl overdoses. They are harder to bring somebody back. So one dose of Narcan or naloxone often doesn't work. So you have to keep at least 2 doses on your person at all times. And I'll get into the next bit about who's going to deliver those doses in a moment. So also, many organizations do offer naloxone and Narcan nasal sprays for free. You can research them online. I know I just got mine last week because I had heard it announced over the radio. I know I'm old school. I listen to the radio when I drive. But they talked about free naloxone sprays. And I thought, well, let me test this out. And sure enough, there was a local pharmacy, and I went there and they gave me 2 doses. Amazing, for free. So getting that naloxone or Narcan spray is the life-saving tip number 3. Life-saving tip number 4 is you must have a designated support person. Just as in alcohol, having a designated driver, having a designated support person is crucial. A lot of times when people do drugs, they're not driving. They're just hanging out, quote unquote, chilling. And people do it in groups, 2 or 3, 5 or 10. Have one person who is not going to do drugs that night, who is holding the Narcan, and have several doses of Narcan on hand, because each person should be able to have it. There have been so sadly incidences happening in the United States where people have had a little party at their home and all 5 to 6 people perished because of the fentanyl poisoning. So the designated person can hold the test strips, they can hold the Narcan sprays. It is crucial. Please don't use alone. So that brings me to life-saving tip number 5, which is don't use alone. This is when most people overdose and never come back. Now, I know a lot of introverts like to do things on their own. This is one time you don't want to do it on your own. There is a fabulous 24/7 hotline. It's called Never Use Alone. Let me give you the number. 877-696-1996. Again, Never Use Alone hotline is 877-696-1996. It's called Never Use Alone. It's open 24/7. And I called them this morning just to double check that it's valid and it works. You just give them your first name, you give them your address, and the only time that they will appear at your address is if you're talking, and then all of a sudden you stop talking. They will send EMT to your home to get you and deliver Narcan and take you to the hospital. But the police are never called. So please, there's no excuse to do drugs alone. You can call someone, and please, 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 please do it, because there are people in your lives that love you, that care about you, that would be devastated if you left the planet. And most of you out there are not even trying to commit suicide. It's an accidental overdose, and we're calling it fentanyl poisoning. These 5 life-saving tips are worth going over one more time. Number 1, remove stigma and use the harm reduction model so that you can safely use drugs. Number 2, get the fentanyl test strips so you can test your drugs to make sure there is no trace of fentanyl in your stash. Number 3, get Narcan or naloxone nasal sprays. Number 4, give those nasal sprays to your designated person so that if you do overdose, they can revive you. Number 5, never use alone. And if you are physically alone, know that you are actually never alone. You can call Never Use Alone at the number on the screen. And please be safe. Please take care of yourself. Please take care of your loved ones. I thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the Sober Sofa. Welcome, welcome, and thank you so much for subscribing, for hitting the bell notification, thumbs up to my videos. And I look forward to seeing you every week. And if you'd like to leave a comment on this video, please do so, or you can always send me a private email at sobersofa@gmail.com. I look forward to seeing you next week at the Sober Sofa.